Hello, it's Mike from Dimensional Walking, and today we're going to do part two of the key players in the most mysterious Dulce Underground Base. So please catch part one because there was quite a few players, key players as I call them, um, on that particular video. And we're going to continue with that video with the whole video on the Dulce Underground Base. And again, I want to give a shout out to Norio Hayakawa, which has written quite a bit of material on the Dulce Underground Base and did several um, conferences there in Dulce, which like I said in the first video, that I had worked with him or helped him or assisted him a little bit on the first conference, and it was wild and crazy, let me tell you. So, anyways, here we go. This is part two, and we're going to talk about some of the other key players involved with the strange world of Dulce Underground Base. The first one we're going to mention again is this guy named Thomas Edwin Castello. And again, many people say that this is probably not his real name. Uh, but, anyways, well, that's the best name we got right now. So, Norio stated that there was this guy, this colonel, this Air Force colonel, who was retired, who claims that he was involved with Dulce. Okay, so basically, he's acknowledging that Dulce does exist. This retired colonel, but he claims that there was never a person named Thomas Edwin Costello that was there or employed in any type of role as a security person. Okay. And I think Norio knew this colonel. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe he knew him. So he felt pretty strong about this. But again, like you will see in quite a few of these people, their names seem to be a little iffy if it was the correct name or they changed their name or somebody changed their name. I don't know if they're just worried about, getting whacked or killed or whatever you want to call it. But anyways, and some of the names are all over the board. Okay. And Thomas Costello um, is probably one of those names also. So anyways, next person is Christa Tilton. She came on the scene slightly after Ann West. Um, Christa Tilton and Tom Adams, who I've talked about before, were initially partners, according to a guy named Tim Beckley. I'm not too sure who Tim Beckley is, and there's no information on him at all. But Christa Tilton later got back together with Wendell Stevens, and I think most of you have heard of Wendell Stevens. Um, Christa Tilton was featured on a Japanese TV program back in 1989. And in 1980, she claimed that her daughter was a hybrid. And she also claimed that she flew over Archuleta Mesa and over a place called Soldier Canyon um, with the Nippon TV station, which is a Japanese network, in 1989. And she had several appearances on the Japanese TV network. Um, she claims that she had taken a photo of a circular structure over when she was flying over Soldier Canyon, which is slightly southwest of Dulce. And Ann West, who I talked about before, she claimed that Christa Tilton was nothing but trash. So I don't know what all that fits into the game, but anyways, they both are players, and it doesn't sound like they liked each other. Okay, the next person is Branton, okay, and AKA Bruce Walton. Beginning in the early 1990s, he compiled a book, quite a famous book, actually. I read a lot of it, called the Dulce Book. Also, the Dulce Wars. I think it's also called the Dulce Papers, too, if I remember correctly. Walton allegedly got most of his information from Tal, and we've talked about Tal Levinson, I think his name, Levinsky. And he got some information from John Lear and also from a guy named Valerian. or as some people call him, John Grace. Crazy, right? So Tal claimed that Bruce Walton was in prison in 2009 in Utah for for some felony charges. Okay, so I'm not sure how that fits in the felony charges. I know that a lot of the stuff in the Dulce papers that this Branton did had something to do with Utah. Okay. It talked about reptilians there. It talked about all kinds of really strange stuff. And it all had some relationship to Dulce Underground Base. And it had it's quite a crazy story. These Dulce papers also talked about the Dulce Wars. It's a really interesting read. I don't know if any of it is true, although I can collaborate a few things that happened to me when I was in Utah. So there's probably something to it, to some degree, anyways. The next guy is somebody I personally know, Gabe Valdez. Okay, and he was a retired um, New Mexico State Patrol officer, and he was in charge of the whole Dulce region or Dulce area for many years. Actually, from the early '70s to the late '80s, almost 20 years. Okay, and I met when I lived in Albuquerque. I met him over a couple year period of time, and we've talked many times. Um, of course, Valdez claimed that the government was most likely, and he was involved with the cattle mutilations. Okay, which happened to be a lot of them in the state of New Mexico happened to be around Dulce, New Mexico. So he was always out there investigating cattle mutilations, and he heard a lot of stuff from a lot of people in the area. Okay. So Valdez claims that the government was most likely responsible for the cattle mutilations, which started perhaps around 1975. He claims that the government may have begun to periodically monitor the radiation level um, of certain cattle because there was in this underground explosion called gas buggy that happened in the area around 1967, and that basically is 22 miles southwest of Dulce. Okay, so this whole thing is just it's got all kinds of stuff going on here. Valdez also states the government staged several UFO incidences in the Dulce area, Archuleta Mountain, Archuleta Mesa. Okay, by the use of high tech equipment such as prototypes of holographic imaging projections, as well as unmanned aerial vehicles, remotely controlled platforms that would make it look like flying saucers. Um, I have to be honest with you. In all my conversations, I don't remember that part of the conversation. If he told me about that, it sounds very interesting. I'm sure some of this information I'm giving you is from Norio, and Norio knew Valdez very well, probably better than I did for sure. Okay, Valdez believed that there was a bio warfare experiments that were conducted at Dulce, and that the UFO alien stories were concocted to cover up various other black projects in the area. Um, so I think Gabe was pretty skeptical of things around the underground base, but I don't think he poo-pooed it. Okay, I believe he believed there was something going on there underground. Okay, and here's the reason why. Because a few weeks before he died, and he apparently alleged he died of a heart attack, natural causes, nothing strange, who knows? Okay, but here was the interesting thing. He told me at a conference, he told me at a conference that I was participated in Albuquerque, and he offered to take me up to Archuleta Mountain. Now remember, the base, suppose it was Archuleta Mountain, not an Archuleta Mesa. He was going to show me one of the vents to the underground base. And he was very confident this is truly a vent. And he had reasons that he told me why. And I was pretty curious and I was really considering doing it. But unfortunately, he passed away about, 2 or 3 weeks after we had that conversation. So, anyways, never got a chance to check it out. But I do believe, even though other people will say otherwise, he believed there was something there and there was possibly a base. Okay. So then there's a guy next, William Bill Moore. Okay. And he was an interesting guy because he was a guy that wrote the book Incident at Roswell. And he wrote the book, I think it was 1980. And this, of course, was a book about Roswell and talks about Roswell. But the interesting thing here is that he claimed that he was also involved with a guy named Richard Dodie about the same time, 1980. And he participated in a disinformation ploy, basically, to saturate Paul Benowitz again, uh, who was pursuing, Paul Benowitz at the time was pursuing this independent investigation about Dulce. And so the story goes that Richard Doty and this William Bill Moore were feeding information that may have made Paul Benowitz crazy. Maybe that was the reason why he was having so many mental issues. Anyways, this guy Bill Moore, he basically did a confession in 1989 at the MUFON conference in Las Vegas, but there's no really verified information outside of his confession that there was anything to this, feeding him and Richard Doty and him feeding bad information to Paul Benowitz. Then let's talk about Richard Doty. Um, Initially, Richard Doty was at the Kirkland Air Force Base, and he was part of a group that was called AFOSI, which is Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And he was not a high-ranking guy at all. Um, and he claims, of course, he had participated in this disinformation along with Moore. Again, there's no documentation to prove that at all. Um, Even though there is some documentation that Paul Benowitz's name and Doty's name appear in one or two of some official documents at Kirkland Air Force Base, but there's really no real detail saying that he was doing something negatively to Paul Benowitz. Um, Later on, another thing about Doty was he became a promoter of he was a promoter of the Serpo project, which is kind of a famous weird project that the government was involved with. Supposedly, uh, Camelot project seems to have bought Doty's story hook, line, and sinker. But again, I cannot judge uh, that, but I'm just letting you know some of the interesting things about Richard Doty. Now, a couple other things, and this is some conclusions, and I tend to agree with Norio, that come to find out, probably the most sane persons in all these key people I've talked about, possibly could be Paul Benowitz and Gabe Valdez. Okay. And I know Gabe. I don't know Paul Benowitz. I think Gabe Gabe Valdez was a very sane person, and that's from my own personal interaction with him. Um, it is quite possible, though, that Paul Benowitz had long pretended that he had been brainwashed by some of the security people, the Office of Air Force Special Operations or Special Investigations, while he continued to conduct his own investigations into Dulce. Um, but nevertheless, he still had this whole uh, paranoia that was kind of growing over the period of time. Another possible scenario may have been there was the dissension among the AFOSI people, and they may have provided Benowitz with some really factual information about Dulce. It's very possible. Apparently, there's some path that lead to that conclusion. Another person to mention, because he is mentioned around on the fringes, is Paul Snyder, who was very famous in his own right, but he never was, just so everybody knows, he never was involved with the original rumors of the Dulce base. He only came on the scene in 1995. Uh, and it was in 1989 that uh, Bob Lazar first came out with a story that there were altercations between the U.S. military and alien entities in an underground installation, but Robert Lazar never specified any type of location. Okay, well, there are the key players. And to show you how complex this whole crazy thing is, it's very complex. And as I say, crazy and wild. Um, and I think it comes to the conclusion, I come to the conclusion, it's probably one of the greatest mysteries involving aliens, UFOs, and underground bases. Um, and I just want to give another shout out to Noriel. Thank you for all the information. Thank you for giving me permission to do this video. And hopefully you keep on investigating Dulce Underground Base. And because it seems to be a very fascinating subject that many people out there are quite interested in. And I personally believe there is something there, either under Archuleta Mesa or Archuleta Mountain, and there's something real to it. And the reason I say that is when I left the first conference, the underground base conference that Norio did, I met quite a few eyewitnesses and showed me some really interesting things, hybrid aliens, and it looked extremely real. And this was back before Photoshop. And I really, really believe that what they were showing me and telling me was the truth. So that is one of the reasons I believe there could be something underneath that location outside of Dulce, New Mexico. So with all that said, we'll see you. Bye bye.